Forced into marriage papers, she was saved when a cowboy ripped them up and said, "She's mine." The pen trembled in her hand as Mayor Dalton slid the marriage papers across his oak desk. Emma Carter stared at the document that would bind her to Vincent Blackwood, the wealthiest ranch owner in 3 counties and the cruelest man she'd ever met. Her father's gambling debts had sealed her fate 6 months ago when he'd lost everything to Vincent in a poker game, including the promise of his daughter's hand. "Sign it," her father muttered from the corner, unable to meet her eyes. His shame hung thick in the air, but not thick enough to stop him from selling her future. Emma's fingers touched the pen. Through the mayor's window, she could see the dusty street of Redemption, Texas, where she'd grown up dreaming of a different life. Vincent stood behind her, his expensive cologne making her stomach turn. He'd already started making plans for their wedding night, whispering them in her ear whenever no one was listening. "Today, Miss Carter," Vincent said, his voice smooth as snake oil, "we have a schedule to keep." The door burst open with such force that the frame splintered. A tall cowboy filled the doorway, his hat shadowing his face, dust covering his worn leather jacket. Emma recognized him instantly. Jake Morrison. He'd left Redemption 5 years ago after his family's ranch burned down under mysterious circumstances. Everyone suspected Vincent had been involved, but no one could prove it. Jake's boots thundered across the wooden floor. Before anyone could react, he snatched the papers from under Emma's hand and tore them in half, then quarters, then into pieces so small they fluttered to the ground like snow. "She's mine," Jake said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. Vincent's hand moved toward his hip, but Jake was faster. He had Vincent's wrists locked before the older man's fingers touched his pistol. The mayor stumbled backward, knocking over his chair. "You dare," Vincent hissed, his face turning purple with rage. "I own her debt. I own her father. I own her." "You own nothing but the lies you've built your empire on," Jake said. He released Vincent's wrist and turned to Emma. His eyes, green as spring grass, met hers for the first time in 5 years. "Come with me. Right now." Emma's father stepped forward. "Now hold on. There's papers signed. There's money owed." Jake reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. He threw it on the mayor's desk. $20,000. That covers Carter's debts and then some. "The deal's done." Vincent's laugh was ugly. "You think I'll let you walk out of here?" "I've got 10 men outside. This town answers to me." "Then call them in," Jake said. "Let's see if they're willing to die for your pride." The silence stretched like a bowstring pulled too tight. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. She dreamed of escape 1,000 times, but never like this. Never with Jake Morrison standing between her and a monster, offering her a chance at freedom she didn't understand. Vincent's eyes narrowed. "Where did a broke ranch hand get $20,000? "That's my business," Jake said. "The debt's paid." "Emma's free. We're leaving. You're signing your death warrant," Vincent said. Jake's smile was cold. "I've been dead before. Didn't take." He held out his hand to Emma. She looked at her father, who couldn't meet her gaze. She looked at Vincent, whose expression promised violence and revenge. She looked at the mayor, who seemed relieved someone else was making the decision. Then she looked at Jake's outstretched hand, calloused and scarred from hard work, offering something she'd stopped believing in.
"She took it."
Jake pulled her close and moved toward the door, keeping his body between Emma and Vincent. His other hand rested on his gun, ready but not drawn. They stepped into the afternoon sun, and Emma saw what Vincent had meant. 10 armed men lined the street, hands on their weapons. "Anyone moves, everyone dies," Jake said calmly, "including your boss. Think about whether his money's worth your life." He guided Emma toward a black horse tied at the rail. It was the most beautiful animal she'd ever seen, powerful and alert. Jake lifted her into the saddle with ease, then swung up behind her. His arms came around her to grip the reins, and she felt safer than she had in months. "This isn't over, Morrison," Vincent called from the doorway. Jake looked back over his shoulder. "Yes, it is. You just don't know it yet." He kicked the horse into motion, and they thundered down the main street of Redemption, leaving behind everything Emma had ever known. They rode hard for 3 hours, taking trails that wound through canyon country where the red rocks rose like cathedral walls. Jake didn't speak and Emma didn't ask questions. The rhythm of the horse beneath them and the steady presence of Jake's body behind hers created a cocoon where thoughts could wait. Finally, as the sun began to sink toward the horizon, Jake guided the horse to a hidden spring surrounded by cottonwood trees. He dismounted first, then helped Emma down. Her legs were shaky from the long ride. "We'll rest here," Jake said. "Vincent's men won't find us before dark, and they won't track at night." Emma watched him unsaddle the horse with practiced efficiency. 5 years had changed him. The boy she remembered had been softer, quicker to smile. This man moved like a wolf, all controlled power and awareness. "Why did you come back?" she finally asked. Jake glanced at her while loosening the saddle straps. "I heard what your father did." "Heard Vincent was forcing the marriage, but where did you get that money?" $20,000. "I've been working," Jake said. He led the horse to water. "Saved every penny, made some investments. Had a good teacher in Montana who showed me how money could work for you instead of the other way around. You came back just to save me?" Jake turned to face her fully. "Emma, when I left Redemption, I made myself a promise. I'd come back when I was strong enough to face Vincent and win. When I could protect the things that mattered." He paused. "You've always mattered." Emma's breath caught. They'd been friends as children, always competing to climb trees faster or ride horses better. But he'd left before anything more could develop between them. "You can't just claim me as yours," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "That's what Vincent tried to do." "You're right," Jake said. "I shouldn't have said it that way. But I needed Vincent to understand you were under my protection. I needed everyone in that room to know I wasn't leaving without you." He moved closer. "But you're not mine, Emma. You're yours. I just gave you back the choice." "What choice? Whether you want to stay with me or go somewhere else? I've got a ranch in Montana. It's not big, but it's honest land. You could work there, or I could give you money to start fresh anywhere you want. Colorado, California, wherever suits you." Emma studied his face in the fading light. "And if I choose to stay with you?" "A real partnership. No papers forcing you. No debts binding you. Just two people choosing each other every day." It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. But looking at Jake, remembering the boy he'd been and seeing the man he'd become, Emma felt something she hadn't felt in 6 months. "Hope. Vincent will come after us," she said. "I know. He'll want revenge for the humiliation." "I'm counting on it," Emma frowned. "What do you mean?" Jake's expression hardened. "Vincent Blackwood burned my family's ranch, killed my father, scattered my brothers and sister. He did it because we wouldn't sell our water rights." He picked up a small stone and threw it into the spring. "I've spent 5 years getting ready for this. Coming back for you wasn't just about saving you from a bad marriage. It was about drawing Vincent out, making him angry enough to come after me personally. You're using me as bait?" "No," Jake said firmly. "I'd never do that. But Vincent's ego won't let him ignore what happened today. He'll chase us, and when he does, I'll be ready. I've got evidence of his crimes. I've got witnesses who will finally talk now that someone stood up to him. And I've got a federal marshal who's been wanting to bring Vincent down for years." Emma processed this information, so this was always about revenge. "It's about justice," Jake corrected. "And yes, about you. Both things can be true." He stepped closer. "Emma, I won't lie to you. The next few weeks will be dangerous. Vincent won't stop until he's caught or dead. But at the end of it, he'll be free for real. Not just from him, but from everything he represents." The night sounds of the canyon began to rise around them. Crickets sang, and somewhere a coyote called to its pack. "I should be angry," Emma said. "You didn't tell me the whole plan. Would you have come if I had?" She considered it. "Probably not. I would have thought you were crazy." "I am a little crazy," Jake admitted with the ghost of a smile. "But I'm also right. Vincent's gotten away with too much for too long. Someone has to stop him." Emma looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Then I'm with you. Not because you claimed me, but because I'm choosing you. And I'm choosing to see this through." Jake's smile was genuine this time. That's all I needed to hear. They made camp under the cottonwoods, and for the first time in months, Emma slept without nightmares. Morning came at the sound of riders in the distance. Jake was already awake, watching from behind a boulder. Emma moved to join him, staying low as he'd instructed the night before. "How many?" she whispered. 6. Vincent's not with them, which means he sent his second-best men. Jake studied the distant figures. "They're tracking, but not well. City thugs, not real trackers. What do? We split up their attention." Jake pointed to a narrow canyon to the east. "That leads to a box canyon. Dead end. I'm going to leave a trail that way, make them think we panicked and ran blind. But we'll actually go where? North, through the water. Horses walking in the stream won't leave prints. By the time they realize they've been fooled, we'll be 10 miles ahead." They executed the plan with precision. Jake was good at this, Emma realized. Not just capable, but expert. Whatever he'd been doing for 5 years had taught him skills that went way beyond ranch work. By noon, they'd reached a small settlement called Porter's Creek. It wasn't much, just a trading post and a few houses, but Jake seemed to know exactly where he was going. He led Emma to a weathered building with a faded sign reading Telegraph Office. Inside, an old man with spectacles looked up from his desk. Jake Morrison.
Heard you were back in these parts. Hello, Walter.
I need to send a message. To the marshal? To everyone who matters. Jake wrote out a telegram while Emma watched. She could see words like evidence and ready and 3 days. When he finished, Walter read it and whistled low. You're really doing this, Walter said, taking on Vincent Blackwood direct. He started it 5 years ago. I'm finishing it. Walter sent the telegram, the machine clicking its urgent message into the wires. When he finished, he looked at Emma. You're the Carter girl. The one he was supposed to marry. Was, Emma said firmly. Not anymore. Well, you picked the right man, Walter said. Jake here's been planning this longer than anyone knows. Gathered evidence from 4 territories. Got witnesses lined up. Even got one of Vincent's own men ready to testify about the ranch burning. Emma turned to Jake. How long have you been working on this? Since the day after the fire, Jake said. When I buried my father. I swore I'd make it right. They left Porter's Creek with fresh supplies and rode hard toward the north. The landscape changed from red canyons to rolling grassland, and by evening they could see mountains in the distance. We're crossing into Montana territory tomorrow, Jake said as they made camp. Vincent's influence doesn't reach as far here. We'll be safer. But we're not running away, Emma said. No, we're regrouping. The marshal is meeting us in 3 days at Fort Carlson. He's bringing territorial judges and federal witnesses. This will be a proper trial, not a gunfight. Emma fed sticks to their small fire. Vincent won't let it get that far. That's why we need to stay alive for 3 more days. That night, they took turns keeping watch. During Emma's shift, she thought about everything that had happened. 2 days ago, she'd been trapped in a nightmare with no escape. Now she was sitting under stars in Montana territory, guarding a camp with a man who'd spent 5 years preparing to give her back her freedom. It should have felt overwhelming, but instead it felt right. Like every choice she'd made in her life had been leading to this moment. Jake relieved her at midnight. As she lay down to sleep, she heard him humming quietly, an old song they used to sing as children. The sound of it carried her into dreams of wide-open spaces and endless sky. The attack came on the 3rd morning, just as they were breaking camp. Vincent had sent different men this time, professionals who knew how to track and move quietly. Emma heard the whistle of an arrow a split second before Jake tackled her behind their saddles. Stay down, he said, drawing his pistol. 4 men emerged from the tree line, guns drawn. But Jake had chosen their camp well. The slight rise gave them cover and elevation. The rising sun was behind them, making them harder targets. Morrison, one of the men called. Mr. Blackwood wants his property back. Tell Mr. Blackwood's property rights ended when he tried to buy a human being, Jake called back. We can do this easy or hard. There's a third option, Jake said. You boys turn around and ride back. Tell Vincent I'll see him in court. The response was gunfire. Jake returned it with careful, measured shots. Emma grabbed her own rifle, the one Jake had given her the first night. She'd always been a good shot, winning competitions as a girl. That skill came back now as she aimed and fired, clipping one man's shoulder. The fight was brief but intense. Jake's positioning gave them the advantage, and his shooting was precise. When the smoke cleared, 3 of the attackers were wounded and retreating. The 4th lay motionless. Jake checked the fallen man, then shook his head. We need to move. Now, they rode harder than ever before, the horse straining under the pace. Behind them, Emma could hear pursuit. More men, closer than before. They're hurting us, Jake said, his jaw tight, pushing us towards something. He was right. Within an hour, they found themselves at the edge of a steep ravine. The only way forward was a narrow bridge made of old rope and wooden planks, swaying in the wind. It's a trap, Emma said. It's the only way across, Jake said. He studied the bridge, then the riders closing in behind them. We have to try. He dismounted and led the horse onto the bridge by the reins. The structure groaned under the weight. Emma held her breath as Jake coaxed the nervous animal forward, step by careful step. Halfway across, a plank cracked but held. Then they heard the gunshot, not at them, but at the rope supporting the bridge. Jake lunged forward, pulling the horse with him as the bridge began to collapse. Emma watched in horror as the section behind them fell away into the ravine. Jake and the horse made it to the far side just as the entire structure came down. He turned back to look at Emma, still on the wrong side of the ravine with armed men approaching. "Jump!" he shouted. The gap was impossible, 20 feet across and 100 feet down. No one could make that jump, but Emma didn't hesitate. She backed up, gave herself a running start, and leaped into empty air. Time seemed to slow. She saw the rocks below, the racing water of the river at the bottom. She saw Jake's face, his hand reaching out. She saw the other side approaching fast, too fast. Jake caught her wrist just as she cleared the edge. The impact knocked the wind from her lungs, and for a moment she dangled over the abyss. Then Jake hauled her up with strength born of desperation, pulling her onto solid ground. They lay there gasping while bullets kicked up dirt around them. On the far side of the ravine, Vincent's men could only watch and curse. There was no way across now, and the nearest bridge was 20 miles in either direction. "You jumped!" Jake said, still breathing hard. "You caught me," Emma replied. They mounted the horse together and rode away from the ravine, leaving their pursuers behind. The afternoon sun warmed their backs as they climbed into the foothills of the mountains. "Fort Carlson is just over that ridge," Jake said. "We made it." But Emma was looking behind them, where dust clouds rose in the distance. More riders coming from a different direction. "Jake," she said. He turned and saw them too. His expression went cold. "That's Vincent himself. He's tired of sending others." "Can we reach the fort in time?" Jake urged the horse faster. "We're going to find out." They crested the ridge and saw Fort Carlson below, its wooden walls and American flag a promise of safety, but between them and the fort was open ground, and Vincent's riders were closing fast. "We'll never make it," Emma said. Jake pulled the horse to a stop. He dismounted and helped Emma down, then pulled the rifle from its saddle holster. "Then we make our stand here." He positioned them behind a cluster of boulders that offered cover. From this elevated position they could see everything. The fort in the distance, Vincent and his men approaching, and the vast Montana territory spreading out in all directions. "I count 15 men," Jake said. "Bad odds." Emma checked her own rifle. "I can shoot. I know you can." Jake looked at her, and something passed between them that didn't need words. "Emma, if this goes wrong—" "It won't," she said firmly. "We didn't come this far to fail now." The riders approached within shouting distance and stopped. Vincent Blackwood sat his horse like a king surveying his domain. He was older than Emma remembered, his face lined with the weight of his cruelties. "Morrison," he called out, "you've caused me considerable trouble." "That was the idea," Jake shouted back. "Return what's mine, and I'll let you live." "She was never yours to own." Vincent's smile was ugly. "Everything in 3 territories is mine. The land, the water, the people. You learned that 5 years ago when your ranch burned?" "I learned that you are a murderer," Jake said. "But I also learned that murderers can be brought to justice." "Justice?" Vincent laughed. "I am justice here. I decide who prospers and who burns. Not anymore." Jake stood up, fully exposed, holding a leather folder. This contains signed testimony from 12 witnesses. Details of every crime you've committed for the past decade. Murders, arson, extortion, fraud. Even the names of the judges and sheriffs you've bought.
Vincent's amusement faded. "You're bluffing."
"I sent copies to 3 different marshals and 2 territorial governors. Even if you kill me today, it's already over. The federal government is coming for you." The silence stretched. Vincent's men shifted uncomfortably. Some of them were hired guns who fought for money, not loyalty. They could sense the tide turning. "Then I have nothing to lose," Vincent finally said. He drew his pistol. "Kill them both." But before anyone could fire, rifle shots rang out from a different direction. Vincent's men scattered as bullets tore through their ranks. Emma turned and saw riders pouring out of Fort Carlson, led by a man wearing a marshal's star. "Federal Marshal Carson," Jake said with relief. "He came early." The fight was over before it truly began. Vincent's men surrendered quickly, throwing down their weapons. Vincent himself tried to run, but was overtaken within minutes. Marshal Carson's men hauled him from his horse and bound his hands. Jake and Emma walked down from their rocky position to meet the marshal. He was a tall man with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Mr. Morrison," he said, shaking Jake's hand. "Your evidence arrived yesterday. We've been waiting for Vincent to make his move." He glanced at Emma. "Miss Carter, I presume?" You've had quite an ordeal." "It's over now," Emma said, hardly believing her own words. "Not quite," Marshal Carson said. "There'll be a trial. We'll need testimony from both of you. But yes, the worst is over. Vincent Blackwood will hang for his crimes." They watched as Vincent was led away in chains. His empire had crumbled in a single morning, built on fear and corruption that couldn't survive the light of justice. "What happens now?" Emma asked Jake. He looked at her with those green eyes that had never stopped seeing her, even after 5 years apart. "Now we decide what we want. Together." For the first time in longer than she could remember, the future felt like something she could shape rather than something that would happen to her. "I want to see your ranch," she said. "The one in Montana." "It's not fancy." "I don't need fancy. I need real." Jake took her hand, and they walked toward the horses. Behind them, the sun climbed higher over Fort Carlson, burning away the last shadows of the past. The ranch was everything Jake had promised and nothing Emma expected. It sat in a valley where 2 rivers met, surrounded by mountains that turned purple at sunset. The house was small but well built, and the land stretched for acres in every direction. "I bought it with the first money I saved," Jake said as they approached. "Worked on it every time I came through this way. Built the barn, fenced the pastures, repaired the house. I always knew I'd need a place to come back to after dealing with Vincent." Emma dismounted and walked around the property. She could see the care in every detail, from the strong corral fences to the neat rows of the vegetable garden. This was the work of someone building a home, not just a shelter. "You did all this yourself?" she asked. "Had some help from neighbors." "That's the Morgan place 3 miles east," he pointed. "Good people. They taught me everything I know about running cattle in this country." Emma turned to face him. "Jake, what are we doing here?" "Really? You saved me from a forced marriage. You brought down Vincent. But what happens now between us?" Jake removed his hat and twisted it in his hands. "I guess that depends on what you want." "I want the truth. Did you really spend 5 years planning to save me, or was I just part of a larger revenge plan?" "Both," Jake admitted. "When I left Redemption, all I could think about was making Vincent pay. But somewhere along the way, as I built this place and made plans for the future, you were always in them. I imagined you here, riding these hills, sitting on that porch. I couldn't separate the 2 goals because they became the same thing, justice for my family and freedom for you." Emma walked to the porch and sat on the steps. "I don't know how to do this. How to trust what I'm feeling. A week ago, I was trapped. Now I'm here and it's beautiful, but I'm scared it'll disappear." Jake sat beside her. "It won't disappear. This is real. The land is real. The house is real. What happened with Vincent was real." He paused. "What I feel for you is real. You barely know me anymore. We were children when you left. Then we'll get to know each other again. No pressure. No expectations. You can have your own room, work the ranch as a partner, or don't work it at all. Stay for a week or stay for a lifetime. Your choice." Emma looked out at the mountains. "I've never had choices before. My father made them all. Then Vincent tried to. I don't even know who I am when I'm the one deciding. Then this is your chance to find out." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun tracked across the sky. Eventually Emma stood. "Show me the rest of it. I want to see everything." Jake gave her a tour of the property. The barn held 3 horses besides the one they'd ridden. The chicken coop had a dozen birds. The root cellar was stocked with preserved foods. There was even a small library in the house with books on ranching, history, and literature. "You read all these?" Emma asked, running her fingers along the spines. "Long winters," Jake said. "Not much else to do." Emma pulled out a worn copy of poetry. She opened it and found notes in the margins, Jake's handwriting making observations about meter and meaning. This discovery touched her more than anything else. The boy she'd known had been practical and physical. This man had depth she was only beginning to see. That night, they ate a simple dinner of bread and stew. Jake had insisted Emma take the bedroom while he made a bedroll in the barn. She'd protested, but he'd been firm. "You need space to think," he'd said. "I'll be close if you need anything." Now Emma lay in an actual bed for the first time in days, staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet except for the wind outside. She thought about everything that had happened. The terror of almost marrying Vincent, the shock of Jake's rescue, the violence of the chase, the relief of Vincent's capture. But mostly she thought about Jake, about the man he'd become, about the way he'd given her choices instead of demands, about the life he'd built here, patient and steady. She got up and walked to the window. In the moonlight, she could see the barn where Jake was sleeping. Or trying to. A lantern was lit inside, casting long shadows. Emma made a decision. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and walked across the yard.
She knocked on the barn door.
"Come in," Jake called. He was sitting on a hay bale, cleaning his guns by lamplight. He looked up when she entered, surprise crossing his face. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "I've been thinking," Emma said. She sat on another hay bale across from him. "About what you said. About getting to know each other again. And I realized something. I do know you. Maybe not all the details of the last 5 years, but I know what matters. I know you're the kind of man who spends 5 years building a case for justice instead of just going for revenge. I know you're the kind of man who gives choices instead of making demands. I know you're the kind of man who reads poetry and takes notes in the margins." Jake set down the gun he'd been cleaning. "Emma, I'm not saying I'm ready for everything," she continued. "I'm not saying I know what our future looks like. But I'm saying I want to find out. I want to stay here. I want to work this ranch with you. I want to learn who I am when I'm free to choose, and I want you to be part of that discovery." Jake stood and crossed to her. He took her hands in his. "Are you sure? You don't owe me anything. What I did because it was right, not because I expected something in return." "I know," Emma said. "That's exactly why I'm sure." They stood there in the lamp-lit barn, hands clasped, while the Montana wind sang outside. It wasn't a kiss or a dramatic declaration. It was simpler and more profound. It was two people choosing to build something together, one day at a time. "Tomorrow," Jake said, "I'll teach you the ranch routine. It starts early." "How early?" "Dawn." Emma laughed. "Then we should both get some sleep." She turned to go, but Jake called her back. "Emma, thank you for trusting me, for choosing this." "Thank you for making it possible to choose," she replied. She walked back to the house, and for the first time in her life, Emma felt like she was walking towards something instead of away from it. The next 3 months passed in a rhythm of work and discovery. Emma learned to manage cattle, mend fences, and read the weather in the mountains. Jake taught her to shoot better than she already could, to track animals, to understand the land. She taught him things too, like how to preserve vegetables more efficiently, and how to keep better financial records. They became partners in the truest sense. Every decision was discussed and made together. Every burden was shared. When the work was hard, they worked harder together. When the work was done, they sat on the porch and talked about everything and nothing. News came from Texas. Vincent's trial had been swift and conclusive. The evidence Jake had gathered proved overwhelming. Vincent was sentenced to hang, his assets seized and distributed among his victims. Emma's father had claimed his share and promptly lost to gambling again. Some things never changed, but Emma found she didn't care. Her father had made his choices and she'd made hers. She sent him a brief letter saying she was safe and well, but didn't include a return address. That part of her life was closed. One evening in late autumn, as they sat watching the sunset paint the mountains golden red, Jake said, "I need to go to town tomorrow. Supplies and mail. Want to come?" "Sure," Emma said. Then she noticed his nervous energy. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. There's something I need to do, something I want to ask you."
"But I want to do it right." Emma's heart began to race.
"Jake, wait," he said. "Let me do this proper. In town, with witnesses, the way it should be done." The next day, they rode into the nearest settlement, a place called Silver Creek. It was bigger than Porter's Creek, with actual streets and businesses. Jake led Emma to a small church at the edge of town. Inside, a minister was arranging flowers. He looked up and smiled. Jake Morrison, right on time. "You planned this," Emma said, turning to Jake. "I wanted it to be special," Jake said. "Emma Carter, these past 3 months have been the best of my life, not because we brought down Vincent or saved the ranch, because I got to spend them with you, because I got to see you discover who you are when you're free." He knelt down, pulling a small box from his pocket. "I'm not asking you to marry me because I rescued you or because we're partners on a ranch. I'm asking because I love you, because you make me better, because I want to spend the rest of my life choosing you, every single day." Emma looked at the ring, a simple gold band with a small diamond. She looked at Jake, his green eyes full of hope and fear. She looked at the minister, smiling kindly. Then she looked at herself, reflected in the church window. She saw a woman who was strong and free and capable of making her own choices. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. Jake's relief was palpable. He stood and pulled her into an embrace. The minister clapped his hands together. Well then, he said, when would you like to have the ceremony? Emma and Jake looked at each other. They'd been partners for months, building a life together. The ceremony was just making official what already existed in their hearts. Today, Emma said, if that's possible. The minister checked his schedule. I've got an hour free. Let me gather some witnesses. Within minutes, people began arriving. Neighbors from surrounding ranches who Jake had befriended, the shopkeeper from the general store, the local schoolteacher, people who'd heard Jake Morrison's story and respected what he'd done. The ceremony was simple but perfect. No fancy clothes or elaborate decorations. Just two people standing before God and community, promising to love and support each other. When the minister pronounced them married, the small crowd cheered. Afterward, the shopkeeper insisted on hosting a celebration at the general store. Someone brought out a fiddle. Someone else provided food and drink. The impromptu party lasted until evening, full of laughter and music and the warmth of community. As Emma and Jake danced together in the fading light, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From the mayor's office where she'd almost signed away her freedom, to this moment where she'd freely chosen her future. What are you thinking? Jake asked. That I'm grateful, Emma said, for all of it. Even the hard parts. Because they led here. To me? Jake teased. To myself? Emma corrected. To knowing who I am. To being free to choose. You just happen to be my choice. Jake laughed and spun around. The fiddler played faster, and other couples joined them in dancing. The Montana sky darkened to show stars beyond counting, and Emma Morrison danced with her husband under them all, finally and completely free. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch prospered as Emma and Jake worked it together. They expanded their herd, built a larger barn, and eventually added 2 rooms to the house. Neighbors became friends. The community grew around them. Emma started a school for ranch children in the area, teaching them reading and arithmetic in the winter months when work was lighter. Jake served as a deputy marshal occasionally, using his skills to track criminals and bring them to justice, but mostly they worked their land and built their life. 3 years after their wedding, Emma gave birth to a daughter they named Grace. 2 years later, a son arrived, whom they called Henry. The children grew up running wild across the ranch, learning to ride and rope and work the land. One evening, when Grace was 10 and Henry was 8, the family sat on the porch after dinner. It was their tradition, watching the sunset and talking about the day. Mama, Grace asked, tell us again how you and Papa met. Emma looked at Jake, who smiled. It was a story the children never tired of hearing. Well, Emma began, I was in a very difficult situation. I thought I had no choices left, no way out. But then your father burst through a door and tore up the papers that would have trapped me. He said I was his, but really he was giving me back to myself. Was it romantic? Grace asked. She was at the age where romance seemed impossibly important. It was better than romantic, Emma said. It was real. It was brave. It was someone seeing me as a person who deserved freedom and choices, not as property to be owned. And then you fell in love? Grace prompted. Then we got to know each other, Emma said. And yes, we fell in love. But the love grew from respect and partnership, from working together and making choices together. Henry, more practical than his sister, asked, Did you ever see that bad man again? The one who tried to force you? No, Jake said. Vincent Blackwood paid for his crimes. He never hurt anyone again. Good, Henry said with satisfaction. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun touched the mountains. Emma reached over and took Jake's hand. After all these years, the gesture still felt as meaningful as it had that first time. Do you ever regret it? Jake asked quietly, a question he'd asked before and would ask again. Choosing this life, Emma looked at her children, at her home, at the land they'd built together. She looked at the man who'd given her the most precious gift possible, the freedom to choose her own path. Never, she said. Not for a single moment. Jake squeezed her hand. Good. Because I choose you, too. Every day, I choose you. Grace made a face. That's mushy. That's love, Emma corrected with a laugh. As darkness fell over the Montana Valley, the Morrison family went inside their home. The lamps were lit, the doors were closed against the cooling night, and another day ended in peace and contentment. Emma Morrison, who had once been Emma Carter, trapped and terrified with no way out, stood in her kitchen and felt complete. She had a family she loved. She had land she'd helped build. She had freedom she'd fought for. But But most of all, she had herself, discovered and claimed through choices that were entirely her own, and that, she thought as she helped her children get ready for bed, was worth everything it had taken to get here. Years later, when Emma was old and her children had children of their own, she would tell them the same story, about the day a cowboy ripped up marriage papers and gave her back her life. About the journey to Montana and the building of a ranch, about learning who she was when she was free to choose. But she would always end the story the same way, looking at whichever grandchild or great-grandchild was listening with rapt attention. The most important thing, she would say, is not that someone saved me. It's that I learned to save myself. Your grandfather gave me the opportunity, but I was the one who took it. I was the one who jumped across that ravine. I was the one who chose to stay. I was the one who built this life. And that, she would finish, her eyes still bright despite her years, is what I want you to remember. You always have choices. You always have power over your own life. Sometimes it doesn't feel that way, but it's true. And the person you become when you exercise that power, when you make your own choices, that's the real you. That's the person worth knowing. The children would nod solemnly, not quite understanding, but knowing it was important. And Emma would smile, pat their hands, and send them off to play, because that was the truth of it, she thought. The real story wasn't about being rescued. It was about being free. And freedom, real freedom, was something you claimed and kept claiming every single day of your life. Emma Morrison lived to be 87 years old. She died peacefully in her sleep in the house she and Jake had built on the land they'd worked together. Jake had passed 5 years earlier, and those final years had been hard, but Emma had endured them with the same strength she'd shown throughout her life. At her funeral, the church in Silver Creek was packed. Her children spoke. Her grandchildren read poems. Her great-grandchildren, some of whom she'd barely known, came from across the country to pay respects. But the most moving tribute came from an unexpected source. An old woman, bent with age, made her way to the front of the church. She introduced herself as Martha Blackwood, Vincent's youngest sister. "I never knew my brother," she said in a wavering voice. "He sent me away to boarding school when I was young. But I knew of his crimes, his cruelty. When he was arrested, I was relieved. When he was hanged, I felt free for the first time in my life." She looked at Emma's casket. I heard the story of what Jake Morrison did that day. How he tore up those papers and gave Emma Carter a choice. I wished someone had done that for me. But Emma's story gave me courage. If she could claim her freedom, so could I. So I did. I left the Blackwood name behind. I built my own life. Martha wiped her eyes. Emma Morrison never knew me, but she changed my life anyway. Her story taught me that we're not defined by what others try to force us to be. We're defined by who we choose to become. Thank you, Emma. Thank you for showing us all what freedom looks like. There wasn't a dry eye in the church. Emma was buried next to Jake on a hill overlooking their ranch. The headstone was simple. Emma Morrison. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother. She chose freedom. And in the years that followed, as children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren worked the ranch and carried on the family legacy, they would sometimes climb that hill and sit by those graves. They would tell each other the story of how it all began, of a cowboy who ripped up papers and a woman who jumped across a ravine. But more than that, they would remember the lesson, that freedom is always a choice, that dignity is always worth fighting for. That love, real love, is built on respect and partnership and choosing each other over and over again. The ranch still stands today, worked by the 5th generation of Morrisons. The house has been expanded and modernized, but the original structure remains at its heart. On the porch where Emma and Jake used to sit and watch the sunset, their descendants do the same. And sometimes when the wind blows through the Montana Valley just right, carrying the scent of grass and rivers and infinite sky, you can almost hear Emma's voice, not speaking words, but carrying a message that transcends language. You always have a choice. You are always worth more than what others try to make you. Your freedom is yours to claim. Your life is yours to build. And that truth, passed down through generations, remains as solid and enduring as the mountains themselves.